part of Double P Media, doublepmedia.com.
Hey, if you haven't seen Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and don't want to know what happens in the movie until you do, then I gotta warn you, this podcast could really ruin your day. So go watch the movie and then come back. Otherwise, welcome to the Multiverse of Music. Welcome back to Bustin' Blockbusters. Matt Murdock with you. Just a reminder, at Bust Blockbuster on Twitter. At Bust Blockbuster on Twitter. You can send emails if you want to talk to me. mattsaudioblog@gmail.com. MATTS audioblog@gmail.com. You can find everything that I do, including all of the stuff that I do for here at Double P, at mattsaudioblog.com. Speaking of Double P, be sure to follow them at the word double, the letters PHQ, on Twitter and Instagram. You can find them on Facebook, facebook.com/the word double, the letters PHQ. Don't forget their website, doublepmedia.com. That's the word double, the letter P, the word media.com. And same address for the YouTube, youtube.com/C/the word double, the letter P, the word media. Today we dive into the Multiverse of Madness score by Danny Elfman. I'm going to be giving you a little bit about Danny himself, his bona fides, so to speak, and his associations with the makers of this film that made him, outside of Michael Giacchino, I think a very good choice for this film. We'll be exploring both the soundtrack that came out for this movie and from the film itself as we go along, so that we can identify some key themes, how things have changed between the prior Doctor Strange film and this one musically, and the way that that reflects the way things have changed in the MCU itself. And this is your absolute last warning. I don't want to be the person that hurts you by spoiling events in this film on a podcast that's only about the music of the film. I'm not even really going to get into the story that much, only the way that the music relates to the story. So why are you even here if you haven't seen the film? I don't want to be the person that hurts you by telling you that people die in this film. People that we love die in this film. If that's not enough to turn you away, I don't know what else is, and I'm just going to continue. You've been warned. By the way, it's Wanda that dies. It's Wanda that dies. And if you're still here now, boy, have I ruined it for you. Moving on, let's talk about Mr. Elfman, Daniel Elfman, the composer for this film. This is a changeover from the previous composer, Michael Giacchino. I personally think that Michael Giacchino did a great job with the original Doctor Strange film. I loved his score. I love that just tiny snippets of the original theme that Giacchino penned were retained in this film. But I also love how Elfman created new themes to demonstrate that the MCU is ever expanding. But let's talk about this guy, Elfman himself. Now, if you are someone who is younger, I will totally understand if you don't know this, but I imagine that you do, because the younger generation is much better at using the internet than me. So you probably already know that as an old person, such as myself, I was first exposed to Danny Elfman as a singer-songwriter for the band Oingo Boingo in the 80s. But as an aspiring musician, and at that time still a student, I became very inspired by Elfman's leap to composing for film. I was pretty young and headstrong in my days, and didn't think that those two paths could ever cross. As it turns out, it happens an awful lot, but at the time I didn't know it, and I thought, what the heck is this pop star dude scoring my Batman film? What's he doing creating one of the most iconic cartoon themes ever? The Simpsons theme, by the way, is probably my second favorite cartoon theme. Nothing will ever beat the Jetsons. So that tells you how old I really am. But even though this podcast is all about me, it's really not all about me. Back to Elfman. Now, I mentioned Batman before. These were the Michael Keaton Batman films in the late 80s, I think. At any rate, if you are younger, that may not be the thing that you associate him most with. One of the most well-known associations between director Tim Burton and composer Danny Elfman is, of course, Edward Scissorhands. But not unlike John Williams constant association with Steven Spielberg and, of course, George Lucas, Elfman has had similar relationships with a few directors. Tim Burton, as I mentioned, The Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Alice in Wonderland, and Dumbo. He's also had an association with the director of interest for this particular film, Sam Raimi. And during his course of working with Raimi, actually that produced his first scoring for Marvel films. With Raimi, he scored the Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 films. And with Raimi, he's also scored Darkman, A Simple Plan, Oz the Great and Powerful, and of course this film, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Some other films you may be aware of that he has scored: Good Will Hunting, Men in Black, and the 50 Shades of Grey franchise films. So the guy's been around. He knows what he's doing. And so, let's take a look at what he's doing with this film, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I'm still kind of clinging on to that theme that Giacchino actually penned. And we do hear it some in this film. But first, I really want to talk about the layout of the soundtrack, or official soundtrack, or whatever they call those things these days. The one that has all of the music from the film in a single release. Be forewarned that when you find this on Spotify or Amazon Music or wherever you're getting your music from, the order in which the tracks appear is not the same as the order in which the music appears in the film. Was this done to keep people from getting spoiled due to titles, or maybe the sequence of things? I don't know. I don't know why executives choose to change things around or whatever. Maybe it's that Elfman even requested that the main central themes he used in this movie all be placed at the front, and then you get into the sequence of events where those themes are applied. Any of these things could be the case. What does matter is that there is some music in this film that doesn't appear in the soundtrack, and that the cuts in the soundtrack don't necessarily appear in the same order as the music in the film. For instance, cut 6, Gargantos, on the soundtrack appears way earlier in the film than cut 4 in the soundtrack, The Apple Orchard. In fact, Gargantos is, I'm assuming, the big octopus with the single eye that Strange and Wong fight, while as The Apple Orchard is probably pretty apparent to you that that's the scene where Doctor Strange comes and sees Wanda. That's all I want you to keep in mind. So don't really try to follow along with me too much, one way or the other. I'll be talking about these in the context of the main themes that occur frequently throughout the film. One other real quick note. In my experience watching this film on Disney Plus, and granted, I don't have a super expensive surround sound speaker system. You would think, being someone who's way into films and way into music, that I would. I don't. But I found the music to be way down in the mix, with all of the stomping and sound effects being way up front. Just saying. Despite that, I still found some small little edits between what you'll hear on the soundtrack and what you actually hear in the film. Just little snippets, probably to make them line up a little better, but they do line up pretty good for the most part. So let's cover some of the main themes that occur throughout the entirety of the film, and then we'll get into more of the sequence. I already alluded to the Gargantos sequence. That's where we hear the old Doctor Strange theme most applied. We do get little bits of it throughout the course of the film, but for the most part, just like this podcast really isn't all about me, what we find out in this film is that this film really isn't all about Doctor Strange. It's about a larger concept. Now, you've already heard me play that theme that was the original Doctor Strange theme a lot in this podcast already, kind of as my intro and my interlude. So I don't think there's a need to cover that. But just keep in mind that there are snippets of that, mostly hidden, if used at all, throughout the course of the film, and mostly at the beginning of the film. This makes sense for one reason. Before Gargantos shows up, Doctor Strange is still living in a world where he knows the multiverse exists because of what happened in Spider-Man No Way Home, but he thinks he's conquered that problem. So he's still the same old Doctor Strange. When Gargantos happens, the multiverse is no longer something that is within his control anymore. He can't just put it back in the bottle. There are other things that can open that up. And that's why I think it was a very smart choice for Danny Elfman. Even though he was alluding to Doctor Strange, he wanted to distinguish the fact that there is the Strange of the past and now a Strange of the present. A Strange of the past that was with Christine, and then, of course, he got blipped. And we're already seeing a Doctor Strange by the time Gargantos shows up, who is in a new phase of his life. Some of his Avenger friends are gone. He's understood the possibility that there is a multiverse, even though he thinks that he's got it under control right now. And from this moment on, the Gargantos sequence, or you can find it in cut 6 of the original motion picture soundtrack, it's really the last full allusion to the theme proper throughout the rest of the film. Like I said, there are little snippets because everything that has made Doctor Strange who he is tied up in that theme as well. So it must be paid tribute to by Elfman. But he graduates to new things. And the concept that this multiverse is out of his control is one of those new things. And hence we get what I'll call just a motive, even though I guess technically you'd call it a theme. But it's just a sequence that you hear either just the melody of or just the chords of used throughout the entirety of the film. In the official soundtrack, you can find it actually in cut 1. And the title of that cut is Multiverse of Madness. So it's a description of the larger picture by title and by the music, simply because we already know by the time that Stephen Strange in our world finds out that other things can get through the multiverse, that there are other Stranges out there. We've already met and seen the demise of Defender Strange by the time America Chavez comes through and is being chased by Gargantos. There's some interesting parallels to this theme, and another prominent character in this film, our baddie, Wanda. But first, let me just play this for you and explain it just a little bit. So what's happening here is a concept that it depends on what kind of school of thought you're from as far as your musicianship. I call it side slipping, meaning that the center or the home key feels like it changes, usually by a half step. In this case, we have 2 instances of it, but the one that has the biggest kind of gut punch to it, at least to me, is the first one, where you have the melody starting and you think you've got the key established, and then all of a sudden the notes underneath change, and it almost feels like the bottom is falling out a little bit. What our mind does when that happens is we feel like we're losing control of where the center of the tonality is, which is something that we glam onto. It's something that our brains desire to have most of the time, unless we're just looking to be stimulated in some way that is surprising. And really, side slipping or dropping chromatically does intrigue you intellectually. But when I hear this kind of thing, it's always kind of a little scary because it feels like things are slipping away from me. In the same way that this multiverse thing that had been fairly insulated through years and years and years of the MCU is now suddenly coming into our face. Now, I mentioned that there were 2 occurrences. The second occurrence happens right at the end. And rather than it being a side slipping of harmony, it's actually just that the melody goes to a note that is a half step out from where the melody had been. There's more of a jump in the actual harmony itself. So technically it is a side slip, but it's more kind of a jerky kind of thing. Like if you were to turn your head aside and go, "What? That didn't make any sense." These changes in harmony do help represent how jolting some of these concepts could be to our characters. But speaking of our characters, the side-slipping idea has been used in the MCU a few times. But one of the most prominent versions that I can recall recently, especially in Phase 4, came from Christoph Beck, who was the composer for Wanda Vision. It just so happens that we have Wanda as one of our characters. She's our baddie in this film, right? And I don't have any idea whether Elfman conceptually thought of it in this way or not. But one thing that I will say is that the side slipping reminds me of the theme at the end of Wanda Vision every week. Not the one that is famous for being the theme at the beginning of the show, which, by the way, also appears in this film. But Beck's theme at the end of the first episode uses side slipping in the opposite direction of going down. The harmony comes up to meet the melody rather than the harmony falling away from the melody. If you haven't seen WandaVision, sorry, but this is the beginning of that theme that I am alluding to. There is side slipping occurring here as well. It's just in the reverse order. We're sliding into the harmony rather than out of the harmony. I just find it remarkable that you can find that kind of parallel, since it is Wanda, or Scarlet Witch if you prefer, that is pursuing this multiversal angle that is represented by the theme that we've been discussing. Another parallel that you can find between the two is the fact that the note in the melody, as the side slipping occurs, has the same function in both of these instances. I'm going to rattle off a couple of numbers here, so please just bear with me for a second. But the minor third of the home key becomes the major third of the key when it's slipped down, and the reverse is the case if you're slipping up. So in both cases, in these instances, we do have that being the note in the melody when the shift occurs. In our multiverse theme, the minor third is the note that's held onto as we slip out. In the Wanda theme, the major third of the first chord is held out, and as the harmony slips up into it, it becomes the minor third. So holding the same note in the melody is what gives the side slipping some of its power, no matter which direction you go in. And as is the case with this particular film, there is power in it. We hear this motif a lot, like when Strange sees the statue of his other universe self. We also hear it when Strange is talking to Christine when he asks her what their relationship in Universe 838 is, and many, many other times throughout the film. So that is one main theme to keep in mind. One of the themes that kind of replaces what we're used to associating most with Doctor Strange, which is the Giacchino theme. Of course, this film isn't just all about the multiverse, but something that is very strongly connected to that is America Chavez. And she does have her own theme as well. We actually hear some of that theme in the first shots of the film as she is with Defender Strange and they are running from the Beast trying to get to the Book of Ashanti. It sounds like this. And actually, Elfman sometimes changes the rhythm up, meaning that how long notes are held out or whatever. But you can hear it predominantly, especially in the very first sequence, which if you listen to the official soundtrack, that is cut 2, called On the Run. And then think especially to when we were seeing the memory of her, the first time that she created a portal and her mother's got taken away from her. That sequence can be heard on cut 12, Discovering America, in the OST. Incidentally, that cut 2, On the Run, is the other place where you predominantly hear the old Doctor Strange main theme that Giacchino penned. You can really hear it predominantly in that cut as well. And I can only assume that the reason why that was applied was to be kind of a red herring for an audience just coming into the film. Astute watchers would probably recognize instantly that the dress is different, the fact that there's a ponytail, all of that stuff means that it's not our Stephen Strange. But using that theme might help add to the surprise that it's not our Stephen Strange when our Stephen Strange wakes up from the sequence. I love all of these new themes. I think they're fantastic. There is, of course, some themes that are very recognizable that did not make it onto the official soundtrack. We've already briefly discussed one of them, and that being the theme from the openings of the WandaVision television show. And the main version of that in this film occurs when we first see Wanda, I guess from Universe 838, with her kids, and everything is all happy even though it's kind of confusing for us as viewers because we're like, wait a minute, her kids are gone in our universe. No, it's the 838 universe kids. And then, of course, we see our Wanda from 616 wakes up because she's having the same dream walking things that Doctor Strange is having. But in case you're completely in the dark about what I'm talking about, the theme that is used is kind of an amalgamation of the many different versions of themes that we heard at the beginning of the Wanda Vision, depending on which decade comedy series we were looking at. But they were all based on the same motive. And this particular version sounded kind of like the episode 2 version to me a little bit, even though it's not exactly the same. But it sounded like this. Now, there really aren't that many instances of that. Maybe there are little allusions to that within Elfman's score, but the only time that it's really blatantly played is in that first scene that we see Wanda in this movie. Of course, it was the one thing that all of the articles and all of the critics glammed on. To me, it's really not that big of a deal. I like it. I don't love it, but that's just me. One of my favorite moments that's kind of like that, where you feel like saying to Mr. Elfman, excuse me, you want to pick that up? You know, that theme you just dropped, is the X-Men theme that was played during the tribunal when we first see Charles Xavier. Now that was a nice touch, I thought. It was the music as Xavier rolled out that came from the 97, I think, cartoon series for X-Men. Now that was a pretty cool drop right there. That sounds like this. Now, the really odd thing about this is I don't recall hearing either of these in the official soundtrack version. There could be some reasons for that. Just because it was included in the score doesn't necessarily mean that the company that does the rights for the sound recording that is produced has permissions to use those themes. Those themes are owned by other composers or by other publishing companies. So they may have had to been excluded from the official soundtrack for those reasons alone. Maybe that's why all of the articles glammed on these so heavily, because they weren't things that they already knew were coming from the official soundtrack. It's neither here nor there to me, but among those, the X-Men is my favorite of the two. And of course, another thing that the articles mentioned was the allusion to the Captain America theme. Now, I know everybody likes to refer to the version where Peggy and the other Captain Marvel and Fantastic Four and Tuning Fork guy show up to stand in Wanda's way. That's a double W. But my favorite version is actually just a little allusion that you hear to it when we first meet Peggy Carter in this universe. Strange says something smart aleck, and all of a sudden the shield comes flying at him, and then when we see Peggy's face, we get a version of the Captain America First Avenger theme, but it's kind of in disguise. What we hear is this. And when I first heard this, I thought, well, that's kind of got the shape of the Captain America theme, but does it really have the notes? Actually, yes, it does have the actual notes. The difference is it sounds different because the harmony is based in a different place rather than where we're used to hearing it. If I take that exact same shape melody using the exact same notes of the melody, but I change the way the harmony sounds with it, you get what we're used to hearing, like this. Exact same notes were used as the melody. This is how harmony can often give things a different context, a different emotional context. Because when you hear that first version, you don't think of a brave Captain America. Instead, you think, well, this is kind of scary for Doctor Strange. And that's because that's what the harmony tells you. So those were some of the highlights, I suppose, in terms of theme type stuff. And I do suppose you want me to talk just a little bit about the musical battle that the two Stranges had in this movie. Kind of a little cheesy. I enjoyed it. And I suppose that you had to be as tropic as possible in order to really play not just the seriousness of it, but the joke, so that everybody knew what the music was. And if you didn't know, the big organ bits are from Toccata and Fugue by Bach, and you probably also recognized Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 in there. I will say that if you listen to it on the soundtrack version, wherever you get that, the melodies and themes are a little more pronounced, and you can hear how Elfman really worked to kind of connect them together and to make them run against each other, so it really did feel like a musical battle. And that's about all that I have to say about that. Let's take just a couple of moments to talk about timbres and Mr. Elfman's particular style that he adds to almost every project that he does. Something that Mr. Elfman is really good at, and it really works good for this particular project, but something that he's real good at is using choral elements as timbres. Timbres meaning the instruments that are performing the music. And a voice is an instrument. And different timbres, everybody has a different timbre in their different voices. But choral sounds tend to be very pure. And then you have singers add texture to it by the way that they sing it, either because they're singing strange syllables, as in some kind of demonic language, or just because of the way that they manipulate their own vocal cords. And in this particular case, the choral timbres that were used to accompany mostly like the magical kind of things, especially as far as Wanda was concerned, was excellent. I also loved the use of the electric guitar in some of the Wanda stuff as well. I thought that was fantastic. For the X-Men theme, if you ever listen to the original 97 animated version of this theme, you'll note that the melody is being played by some kind of weird sounding instrument that is close to like a double reed kind of instrument. And here, I loved how Elfman chose to duplicate it somewhat, not exactly, but somewhat, by using a type of double reed instrument as well. Now let's talk about some of the stylistic things that Elfman always brings to the table for just about every kind of project that he does. He likes to subdivide a lot. He likes to give these running lines underneath the main theme notes that may be short or long, doesn't matter. He's always giving these running lines that subdivide really well underneath, and what they do is they add excitement. You may have a line that's going like, da da da, but underneath there's always strings just thriving, going. Those are the kinds of things that really add excitement, especially in that very, very first scene in this movie. If you just had whole notes going on through that, yeah, it'd still be exciting. Not nearly as exciting as it is when you've got underneath it. And you find flares like that over a lot of composer stuff. Anytime that the music is demanded to create additional excitement, especially in action sequences and things like that, you always end up with kinds of subdivisions. What the subdivisions do is they make our heart rate go up. We are experiencing things faster. We have to think faster. It tunes our whole body to work faster. And so therefore our heart rate goes faster and we feel the excitement simply because our body is having to produce chemicals to keep those processes going that the pulse is giving us. But I have probably you right to sleep with my music talk. So we are going to leave you now. Hopefully you enjoyed my review of the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. This podcast, it's the Multiverse of Music. At any rate, thank you for joining me. Here's what's going to be happening with this podcast over the next month or so. Absolutely nothing. Sorry about that. I do want to remind you we will be covering The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power on Amazon. That starts the first week of September. We will definitely be back for that. I'm only about halfway through my Phase 3 rewatch, so I won't have any quantity ratings for you as far as that goes anytime soon. But I do highly recommend that you watch Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I really enjoyed the film. I really enjoyed Mr. Elfman's approach to scoring this. He gave the film an evolution in terms of adding new thematic material while at the same time not totally rejecting Giacchino's previous efforts. So all in all, a top rating from me and a top rating to you guys for listening. Really appreciate it. Don't forget, at BusBlockbuster on Twitter and all of that other good stuff. mattsaudioblog@gmail.com, mattsaudioblog@gmail.com, and mattsaudioblog.com, mattsaudioblog.com. Don't forget Double P Media. Find them on Twitter and Insta at the word double, the letters PHQ. Find them on Facebook, facebook.com/the word double, the letters PHQ. The website, the word double, the letter P, the word media.com, as is the YouTube, youtube.com/c/the word double, the letter P, the word media. Thanks for listening. Take care.